Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today I am going to talk a little bit about endings. So I know in the title of the video I put up my favorite endings, but what I really want to do is just talk about what for me makes a good ending, the different types of endings that I like. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the tropes that I like that I could not include in this video because there are some endings that I really like, but to talk about them would be to spoil the series that they conclude. So I can't really include them in the video, but I will talk a little bit about why I like those types of endings. And what sparked this idea, or why I felt like I really wanted to talk about this, is because I had an experience last week where I had the most contrasting experience, I guess, of two endings of something that I really loved. And I wanted to talk about it. So the first thing is not book related, and I will not go into it in great depth here. But for anybody who doesn't know, the anime Attack on Titan had most of its final season a couple of weeks ago, and so there will be another part of the season, but people have been waiting for this ending for a really long time. The manga itself ended not too long ago, and ever since the end of the manga, I have been waiting for this season because everybody talks about the ending of this manga/anime. And it is almost universally disliked. And so going into the final season of the anime, I felt like that was really impacting my experience of watching the show in general. And so when this part of the last season aired, and I found out that I would not be getting the actual ending for another year, I just went and read the end of the manga, which I was really hoping not to do. And I had kind of built myself up to this time, like fastidiously avoiding spoilers, avoiding talking about it, avoiding typing Attack on Titan into YouTube because I didn't want to get the algorithm to throw me up some sort of video that talked about the ending or anything like that. And then the season didn't actually end and I couldn't wait anymore, so I finally read the ending and had a lot of feelings about the ending, but that's not the point of this video. The point of this video is to talk about the things that I do like about endings. It's just that Attack on Titan ending is what prompted me to think about endings in the first place. And what contrasted so sharply with the Attack on Titan ending was me finishing out the last book in the Long Price Quartet series. So for anyone who has been following along on the channel, I have been reading and discussing the Long Price Quartet with a group of other booktubers. So it's myself, Alan, Philip, Andrew, and Nico. We've been having a conversation about each of the books, and we are going to be discussing the fourth book sometime in the next week or two. I'm really looking forward to it. But reading this series has been a wonderful experience. And I just finished the last book, and it was the kind of ending that elevates the entire series. So it is the kind of ending that I think is really rare and really hard to pull off. It's the type of conclusion to a story that makes you look back and reflect on all of the books that came before and appreciate things that the author did that you may not have even realized were important at the time. It's the sort of ending that I think comes from very meticulous plotting, from an immense appreciation for what sort of story you're writing, and a very direct and clear idea of who your characters are, how they are going to grow, and who you want them to be. So I think that the type of ending that we got from the Long Price Quartet is an ending that will only come from a certain type of author. And as I made my way through this 4-book series, I appreciated different elements of Daniel Abraham's writing more and more. And I have to say that after having read the conclusion, I am blown away by the story that he was able to tell. I think it is hands down one of the best concluding novels of a fantasy series that I have ever read. And I think that if you like the type of fantasy that Daniel Abraham has written, I cannot imagine someone who has made their way through this series not loving the final book, both for its content, because on its own, it's a very good book. This series is it's unique in that each book can function as a standalone. You are given enough information in each volume that you wouldn't need to read the ones that come before. But obviously reading them spoils all the ones that come before. So I'm certainly not suggesting that you don't read all the books, but they do function on their own very well. But the building blocks, it was so satisfying to watch them all come together, to truly appreciate what Daniel Abraham can do. I feel like I liked and appreciated this series the whole time that I was reading it. I really enjoyed it, but I did not understand everything until the final pages of the final book. And that is such an accomplishment. It is a wonderful, wonderful ending. And obviously is one of the first endings that I wanted to talk about in this video, because I just think that, as I said before, it elevates all of the books that came before it. And it is the type of meticulously plotted ending that leaves a reader feeling satisfied. It leaves them feeling as if everything they read through, all of the experiences of the characters, meant something. Everything was paving its way toward this final destination. And that is one of the types of endings that I find very satisfying. It is not one that I have seen a lot in fantasy. It is not one that I have seen pulled off a lot in general in media. It takes a very deft mind. It takes a lot of patience, I think, and a very clear understanding of what your story is going to be. Many authors, many creators evolve as they create their work. And I expect that their vision for their work changes as they change. So I think that you need to have a series that is compact, like this one, just 4 books, and probably not too wide in scope. The Long Price Quartet focuses mostly on 2 main characters. And obviously there are, people who come in and out of these 2 characters' lives, who influence the plot, who play huge roles in the stories. But I think because the scope in terms of how many points of view you're actually being given, and the limited number of books definitely helps pull off an ending like this. I think it would be more difficult the broader your series becomes. But in terms of this specific type of ending, I have never seen it done better than the Long Price Quartet. And if you are someone who really loves that satisfying final pages, then you absolutely have to read this. The second series that I'm going to talk about hits on this a little bit. And this is a series that I also felt like made use of events that happened in previous novels and tied them together in a very satisfying way. And that is Tyrant's Throne, the 4th book of the Greatcoat series. So again, another 4-book series. 4 books just must be a sweet spot for me. I think that it allows you to do a little bit more than a trilogy, but without getting too stretched out. And I really, really enjoyed the ending of the Greatcoat series. Very, very different type of series if you contrast it with the Long Price Quartet. This is a very action-focused, plot-focused read, but we do get some really great character development. It is much more focused on one very tight friendship between a group of 3 friends. But some of the things that I really admired about the ending of the Long Price Quartet were also things that I really liked about the ending of Greatcoats. This was another series where each book cannot stand alone like they can in the Long Price Quartet, but each book kind of followed the path of a different character. And this is something that Alan has talked about. This is one of Alan's favorite series. He's the reason that I picked it up. And he kind of ascribes a different book to each character in the series. And the final book of the series is Falkio, our main character. It's really his book. So we're getting to explore his character. And we have followed Falkio throughout the Greatcoat series, and we have watched him confront some of his fears. We have watched him struggle with the difficulties that plague the land that he lives in. We have watched the changing of his relationships, and we have watched his ideals be tested over and over. And we have seen him forced to reflect on the kind of person that he is. And all of the events that happen in books 1, 2, and 3 have all built up to the final conflict that takes place in book 4. And what I really liked about it is that it's not just a resolution in terms of a battle. It's not just the culmination of this big fight that has been building. What the end of the Greatcoat series did, and why I really admired it, is that it it showed us a transition of a main character. So it brought all of the choices of this main character to a point and forced that character to look at themselves, to look at their life, and to look at what they actually wanted and to resolve that in some way. There are a lot of emotional moments at the end of the Greycoats, which I also really liked. There is a lot of good action, and I like that in a series finale as well. And one of the series finales that I will talk about in this video, I love purely for the action. But I think that Greycoats did a great job here of balancing that character piece with the action, with the resolution of the plot, and that's one of the reasons that I really, really liked it. This series in general, much like the Long Price Quartet, is not going to be for everyone. It makes use of a lot of really common fantasy tropes that people might not like. There are some plot conveniences in here, but it has a lot of heart, which is what I really like about it. The characters are very spirited. They have very strong ideals. And those hold true throughout the series, and we see them put in lots of situations where those ideals are tested, where they are tested, where the foundations of their spirit are really ground down as far as they can be. And I think that Sebastian de Castell, the author, does an amazing job of bringing that to a conclusion that feels really satisfying. It's a conclusion that feels earned. I don't think that I was ever absolutely sure what was going to happen in the end. I didn't feel as though everyone was safe or that he was necessarily going to make the easy choice at the end of this series. And it was really emotional. I think that the conclusion to the Greycoat series brought out the most emotion in me of any fantasy series that I have finished over the last couple of years. There have been books that I have read where people have died. There have been series I have read where I have lost characters. But just in terms of character decisions and character growth, making me feel so strongly, this concluding book in the Greycoat series is the one that was able to do that far and away more efficiently than any other book that I have read for the last couple of years. And it is absolutely one of my favorite conclusions to a fantasy series. Another thing that I really like, and this is the third ending that I'm going to talk about, another type of ending that I like is just when they go all out and epic in a way that is just like totally over the top. And this probably comes from my love of anime. Like, you don't grow up watching Dragon Ball Z without having an appreciation for those completely over the top action sequences. Like, sometimes that is what I want out of a fantasy story. If you have ever seen the anime Gurren Lagann, again, same thing. Like, things just escalate to a scale that you cannot imagine. And it is ridiculous, but like in the best possible way. And when I think of that kind of bombastic action that also makes me really happy and feels really satisfying, I am obviously thinking of John Gwynne. And so the conclusion to his Faithful and the Fallen series, and we could either make this Wrath, which is the conclusion of the first Faithful and the Fallen quartet, or we could talk about A Time of Courage, which is the final book in his Of Blood and Bone series. It doesn't matter. I just really love his concluding novels. I go back and forth. I'm not sure if I like Wrath more, if I like A Time of Courage. I really like both of them, but the things that I like about them are very similar in both. And that is just, he goes all in. Like, it is like foot to the ground in the end of his fantasy series. There's just, the action is breakneck. The characters are making so many decisions. You know that there's going to be consequences. Nobody is safe in a John Gwynne novel. Like, you are going in getting your heart broken, and I don't think that spoils anything for either of his series, because it's just, you don't know. Like, it's not going to be the obvious person. It's not going to be who you think it is, but it is going to hurt you when it happens. And I like that. I like those consequences. I like being attached to characters and fearful for them. Like, it really gets the adrenaline pumping and you really are on the edge of your seat. I flew through John Gwynne's books, and his conclusions especially, they brought me so much happiness. I will be able to reread these books innumerable times. I am sure that rereading his series will always make me happy because he paces them so well. The action is written so well. And at least for me, he writes the kind of characters that you really care about. I don't necessarily think that they are the most nuanced characters. I think that he does lean on some common fantasy archetypes, but they feel fresh, and the relationships that they have with each other feel so pure. Whenever I read a book by John Gwynne, I just think about what a nice person he must be and how much he must care about his family, because the relationships between these characters, the familial relationships, the parental relationships, the friendships, they all feel so true and they all feel so strong. And that is what makes you feel connected to the characters. And for me, that is what makes these conclusions so epic. You want to know how these characters' lives are going to end. You are invested in how these characters' lives are going to end. And at least in my opinion, I find his conclusions to be very satisfying. It is a lot of action, but I don't think that it ever detracts from the story. I have found both of the storylines in the series that I have read by him to be written effectively, leaving enough to your imagination that you can kind of wonder about what happens next in the world, but concluding all the plot threads that you have been caring about so much over the course of the story. So that is like another relatively new series for me, but another one that I really, really love. So we had our kind of meticulously plotted ending, really like that. We have our endings that really show you how characters have grown and pay off emotionally in an emotionally satisfying way. And then we have our all-out fantasy epics that are just so much fun to read. And the final type of ending that I want to talk about, and this is like definitely the most divisive ending that I love. This is the ending to the Dark Tower series by Stephen King. So for anybody who is new to the channel or has not heard, after The Lord of the Rings, which I kind of put on its own rung, the Dark Tower series is my favorite fantasy series of all time. I love it. I started reading it when I was really young. I kind of hopped in around the time of the release of Wizard and Glass. So while I did not wait as long as kind of people who had started off the series when it started in the 80s, I was waiting quite a number of years for books 5, 6, and 7 to come out. And there's something about that. So there's something about following a series through time, and not a series that is released kind of one year after another, but a series where you are in it for the long haul, where you have had years to wonder and to speculate and to think about what was going to happen, to rush to the store and buy the book on the day that it comes out and race through it. Like that is a feeling that I'm sure we all really know. For people of my generation, I'm sure that you had that experience with the Harry Potter books, for example. It's probably the biggest book example that I can think of. If you were into YA, Twilight was a big sensation in that way as well. But the first series that was like that for me was the Dark Tower series. And I remember just wondering what was going to happen, how this was going to conclude. And I need to say, this is not meant to be in any way gatekeepery. I love it when new people read the Dark Tower, because I think that it is criminally underrated. But it's weird, it's wacky, it is not for everybody, and I appreciate that, I understand that, but I love it when new people start to like it. That being said, going into this series knowing that the ending is divisive and knowing that there are these kind of like big schools of thought about the ending already gives you ideas about the ending. Going into it knowing nothing, being amongst the first people to read the ending and having to digest the ending and think about the ending was totally different, and it can never be recaptured. You can like the Dark Tower just as much as someone who read it when it came out. You can like it more. You are just as big a fan if you like it now versus if you liked it when it was released. But it is a very different experience to read it without any preconceptions about what is going to happen, without any speculation about why this is divisive, without any theorizing about what people could mean when they say this or what people could mean when they say that. It's totally different. And it is not an experience that I or anyone else can ever have again. It is, you only get to finish a series like The Dark Tower one time. You can reread it, but it's not the same. And I love that. I loved so many things about the ending of this book, and I'm not going to talk about any spoilers. All I will say is that the moment I finished it, I wrote a letter to Stephen King. It's the only letter that I have written to an author. I don't even know if he ever read it. Maybe someone on his PR team read it. Who knows? But it meant so much to me when I read it that I had to do it. Like, it was impossible for me not to talk to somebody about it. And me and my dad came down on very different sides of this ending. So like, talking to him was not especially fruitful because I really loved it. He absolutely hated it. So it was a very different experience for both of us, but I really, really liked it. And that sort of experience is the kind of thing that is difficult to replicate. It is the kind of thing that only comes around, a couple of times in your lifetime. And if I was going to equate the process of waiting, it's almost like that first phase of the MCU from Marvel, where you started off watching Iron Man. And, you were that like nerdy comic book person who knew who Iron Man was, and you went and saw the Iron Man movies. And then over the next 15 years, this built into this huge overlapping phenomenon with people coming in from different movies and kind of culminating in this one giant release. And whatever your thoughts are on Endgame, like that was a cultural event. Like that was a movement. And for me, the Dark Tower release was that kind of movement in my life. And it was such a good experience. I'm in the middle of a Dark Tower reread right now, and I'm looking forward to reading the ending again because I actually have never read the last book again. I have been scared to read the last book again because I don't think it can live up to that first time, but we will see. We will see what I think about it, however many years removed, and, how it goes when I read through it this time. Other than that, like those, I didn't want, like I could put a list of endings that I really liked or, endings that I thought were good, but I don't want to put books on this list just for the sake of having them here. These books are truly the ones that stand out for me as having the best endings that I personally could have ever asked for. There are other series that I really like the endings, that I think the endings are really fitting. There's a lot of standalone books whose endings I really adore, but it's hard to hit that kind of like perfect 10 of an ending, at least for me, because it's hard to wrap up. And the longer your fantasy series is, the more that you have to kind of fit into that ending and the harder it is to meet all of those expectations. There are a couple of series that I cannot talk about, like I said, because there are certain tropes that I really like or certain things that I really like about endings that I don't want to talk about because it would spoil the ending to books. But a couple of things that I just personally tend to enjoy. I really like an open-ended story. Like I like an ending that feels open and that is not concrete, which I'm not sure how popular or unpopular this is. I know that I have seen certain authors criticized for these types of endings, so I think that most people probably like having their plot threads resolved, but I am not one of those people. I am happy with something that is open-ended, and that could be in terms of the plot at large, it could be in terms of relationships, but I like speculating. I like theorizing. There is a whole world of like fandom-based things that thrive due to open-ended content. And it's fun to imagine where your characters are going to go next, what might have happened. There's a lot of what ifs. And I understand that could bring some people a lot of anxiety. They don't want to think about what if. They want to know what it is. I am happy to be a what ifer and kind of think about what could possibly open up into the future. Another thing that I really like is a tragic ending. So I really like tragedy. Especially in terms, like if there is a romantic subplot that ends tragically, I don't know what this says. Like I told this to my husband before I filmed this and he was like, should I be worried? I was like, no, it's fine. But I recognize that that's a bit of a weird thing to enjoy, but I like the heartbreak. I like feeling strong emotions when I read, and I have been very blessed to have a happy, healthy, fruitful life. Like there's not a lot of tragedy in my life, which I'm very, very grateful for. But sometimes it's good to feel all of the emotions from your books. And while I like the like giddy high of romance, I like that sweeping epic feel of fantasy, I also like the big sad of tragedy. It's good to feel the big sad sometimes. My youngest sister is the opposite of this, and this is something that I say to her. So I always say, like, you need to feel the big sad sometimes. She's like, no, keep it away from me. So there are certain things that I really love that I want to recommend or that I have recommended to her that she will absolutely not touch, because she needs to be guaranteed that there will be a happily ever after, which is fair. Life is hard, so it's good to have those neat wrap-ups sometimes. But I like the sadness. So it's hard for me to say, like, give me a book with a sad ending, because then you're telling me that the ending is sad. So these are the kind of gems that I need to discover on my own. But thankfully, they do pop up every once in a while. But those are some of my favorite endings to fantasy series. These are some of the things that I really love about endings. I would like to hear from you what series you think ended on a high note, some of your favorite, absolute favorite endings in fantasy, and what kinds of things make a great ending for you. I would love to hear about it, and I will see you with another video soon. Bye!